Welcome, and let's begin our journey into rhythm. So we're going to spend the next few lessons learning about patterns in drums and percussion. And right now we're looking at Ableton Live's arrangement view, which is where we'll spend a lot of time. I've loaded in a 808 drum kit. This is a very familiar sound to many of you, and it's nice and clear, so we'll be using this to demonstrate the different ideas in this section of the course. Remember though, these sounds are quite unprocessed and nothing is going to sound particularly exciting yet. Okay, so we're going to start very simply, and I'm going to create a MIDI clip. And I'm going to draw in with my pencil a very simple 4x4 club beat. I might actually make this loop smaller, so we're only working with one bar. Okay, I'm going to start off with drawing a note on each quarter note of my kick track. And I'm going to draw a hi-hat on the second eighth note of each quarter note. So we have a call and response. I'm going to turn my tempo up to something a bit more club friendly. So a few observations that I'd like to make of this very simple idea. We have 4 repeating beats underlying the pattern, always the same distance from each other. This would feel very different if I was to start changing that, if I was to maybe move the start position of these beats. Up here, we have a hi-hat that's playing actually the same thing, but it's just offset by half of the distance of each of these drums. Once again, if I play it as it is on the grid, we feel very consonant. It's a framework for something. It's not particularly colourful or interesting to listen to. If I was to move these again, some tension is added. I'll do it the other side. All of a sudden, we have something rhythmic, something you might call a feel or a groove. So again, I want to highlight this phenomenon or this experience that when things are regularly spaced between each other, our brain is able to accept that it's a meter. And when things answer that original pulse in ways that are mathematically similar to those distances, our brains again group that into a meter, and we can easily accept that this is a foundation for a rhythm. A very obvious example of this that we could relate to, and we won't dive into too much today, is a heartbeat. This regular low frequency thump is somehow important to our human experience. Anyway, let's not get too philosophic on the first lesson. A snare drum on the second and third beats, and I'll actually mute these hi-hats. These beats happen 4 times in my loop. These happen twice. So you could say that these occur twice as many times as these. I'm going to open up a synthesizer and I'm going to add this EQ after it where we can see the spectrum. If I was to play a note, we can see that this note is around 260 Hertz. This is a C3. If I was to move an octave up, I can already tell you that this will be playing at 520 Hertz. How do I know that? Well, The octave of a note is the double of its frequency. If we rewind and consider that this sine wave is a waveform repeating at 260 times per second to generate this tone, doubling the amount or the frequency of that vibration will bring us the octave. Halving it will bring us an octave below. So that should be 130. So if I go back to our drums, you could look at this kind of pattern as an octave. This is about the most consonant thing we can do. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to turn my hi-hats on again, and I'm going to move my snare drum to the third quarter note of the beat instead of the second and the fourth. We often use snare drums for emphasis, and in this case, the feel of this loop is different. Compared to if I put back what we did before. Can you feel how your perception of this rhythm is different? In this case, it feels slower, and indeed, because we've put the emphasis on this part of the structure, we experience a 1 and a 2 here and here respectively. When we go back to the second and fourth beats, we experience 1, 2, 3, 4. So a simple thing like moving where the snare sits can drastically change the meter or the perceived underlying rhythm of this structure. Finally, everything we're doing right now is on the grid, which makes for great techno music, but isn't very common in the real world. Let's move things around a bit. And then I'm going to duplicate it and play with this one. I'm going to move my hi-hats so they're all a bit early on their respective grid, and my snare so it's a bit late. Let's hear the original on the grid, and then we'll move to this off the grid and perceive the difference. Okay, so this awkwardness we feel with the kick and the snare, we could call a dissonance. Just like in harmony, we've made these relationships more complicated than a simple 1 and 2 ratio, like an octave. Now something else is happening, and we experience that it's awkward to listen to. I moved it before, the same thing. Okay, so just a simple movement like that can create a lot of complexity, for better or for worse. In this case, I'm going to move both the kick and the snare back a little bit. And also the hi-hat. Now you can hear that I haven't created dissonance in this structure because everything is obeying the same rules, even though these aren't on the grid and these hi-hats are all a bit early. Our brain can much easier accept it. I'm going to do a similar thing going the opposite direction, so making everything a little bit late. Again, we experience that this feels okay. It's definitely got a certain swing or colour to it, but it's not difficult to listen to compared to if I put the kicks back on the correct grid. So we'll stop there for this lesson. Basic rhythmic patterns like this can be seen in terms of complexity and in terms of how much information is held within this pattern or this structure. Just like an octave, doing things at extremely regular intervals of each other where all the parts fit into the same whole, creates some very simple consonance. Conversely, moving things around so that there's no uniformity within the structure creates a sense of dissonance. And your job as a composer when it comes to beats and rhythms is to tame and control these opposing forces. We'll talk more about that in the following lessons. See you next time.